The galaxy was silent. The stars above the barren moon flickered like cold, distant eyes, watching the last moments of a forgotten ruler. Queen Syra lay on the hard, rocky ground, her breathing slow and weak. Her once golden armor was cracked, stained with dirt and dried blood. The elegant cape she once wore as a symbol of power was now torn, barely hanging from her shoulders. This was where her people had left her. Once, the Valith Empire feared and respected her. She had led their fleets to victory in countless wars, expanding their territory beyond what any ruler before her had achieved. But power in the galaxy was a fragile thing. The same generals who had once sworn loyalty to her had turned against her. The same nobles who had praised her name had signed the order for her exile. They'd wanted her dead, but instead of executing her, they chose a crueler fate, abandoning her on a lifeless moon where no one would dare to help. No one wanted to anger the new rulers. No one wanted to risk their own safety for a fallen queen. And so, she was alone. Syra tried to move, but her body refused. Hunger clawed at her stomach, and every breath she took felt like fire in her chest. Her wounds, untreated and deep, were getting worse. The cold wind of the moon bit at her skin, whispering that her time was running out. For the first time in her life, she felt true helplessness. She closed her eyes. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe it was better to disappear, to become nothing. After all, what was a queen without her throne? What was a warrior without her army? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound, distant at first, but growing louder. A deep, rumbling noise. It was not the wind, nor was it the shifting of the rocky ground. It was something else, something unnatural. A ship. Syra's eyes snapped open. The ship's engines roared as it descended, kicking up dust and debris. It was small, old, and looked nothing like the sleek warships of her empire. The metal was scratched, the paint was peeling, and it carried no insignia. This was no warship. This was something else. A scavenger's vessel. She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain in her side. Her mind raced. Who would come here? Did her enemies send someone to finish her off? Or was it just some foolish salvager looking for scrap? The ship landed a short distance away. The engines powered down, leaving an eerie silence. A few moments later, the hatch opened, and a lone figure stepped out. A human. Syra's blood ran cold. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, a small species from a planet called Earth. Compared to the Valith, they were weaker, less advanced, and far less respected. Most of the galaxy saw them as nothing more than stubborn survivors, a race that had barely managed to leave their home system. Yet here one stood, walking towards her without fear. He was tall but not imposing, wearing a simple jacket over a light armor vest. His boots crunched against the rocky ground as he moved closer. His face, half hidden by a visor, showed no hesitation. Syra's fingers twitched toward the broken dagger at her side. She was weak, but if this human had come to loot her remains, she would not die without a fight. The human stopped a few feet away. He looked at her, then at the ruined state of her armor. His gaze traveled to the wounds on her arms, the bruises on her skin. He let out a slow breath, then reached into his pack and pulled out a small metal container. Water. Syra stared. The human crouched and placed the container on the ground between them. He didn't push it toward her, nor did he speak. He simply waited. Her body screamed for water, but her mind pulled her to be cautious. Why was he helping her? No other species had dared to come near this moon, afraid of what the Valith would do if they learned someone had aided the exiled queen. But this human, he had come anyway. Finally, her instincts gave in. With slow, shaking hands, she reached for the container and brought it to her lips. The first drop of water touched her tongue, and she nearly gasped. She had expected betrayal. She had expected death. She had never expected kindness. And for the first time since her exile, a spark of hope flickered inside her. Who was this human? And why had he come to save her when no one else dared? The water was cold and fresh, running down Xyra's dry throat like life itself. She had expected poison or some cruel trick, but there was none. The human just watched her, his expression calm, waiting. She finished the water and set the container down, her golden eyes locked onto him. He was strange. He had no fear, no hesitation. Every other species had abandoned her, too afraid to challenge the new rulers of the Valith Empire. And yet this lone human had landed here, risking everything. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was weak, but her tone was sharp. "Who are you?" The human didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pack again and pulled out a small food ration, tossing it toward her. Xyra caught it out of reflex, surprised at the simple gesture. Then, at last, he spoke. "Dane." Just one name. No titles, no rank, no explanation. Xyra frowned. She was a queen, a warrior, a leader who had commanded fleets. And this human dared to give her just one name, like she was a common soldier. She wanted to be angry, but she was too tired. She tore open the ration pack and took a bite. The food was dry, tasteless, but it was more than she had eaten in days. Dane didn't move, just watched her with a careful gaze. Xyra swallowed, then asked again, "Why are you here?" Dane tilted his head slightly, as if considering his answer. "I heard a distress signal." Xyra narrowed her eyes. "And you decided to help?" Dane shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. She almost laughed. Almost. Humans were strange creatures, always talking about honor and doing what was right. But in this galaxy, morality was a weakness. Power ruled everything. "You are a fool," she said. "The Valith will kill you for this." Dane didn't flinch. "Maybe." Xyra studied him. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered before. Most humans she had seen in the galaxy were traders, workers, or low-ranking soldiers in other species' armies. But Dane had the look of someone who had been through danger before. His clothes were worn, his armor scratched but well-maintained. His belt carried a blaster, but it wasn't the weapon of a military officer. It was the kind carried by survivors, people who didn't rely on an army to protect them. A rogue. A wanderer. "You are a scavenger," Xyra said, more of a statement than a question. Dane nodded. "Sometimes." "Then why risk your life for me?" Dane sat down on a nearby rock, resting his arms on his knees. "You think too much," he said. "You needed help. So I helped." Xyra clenched her jaw. He made it sound so simple, as if the entire galaxy wasn't hunting her. She looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, the new rulers of her empire were celebrating their victory, believing she was dead. If they found out she had survived, they would send assassins. No one who defied the empire lived long. "You should leave," she said, "before it is too late." Dane didn't move. "Not without you." Xyra tensed. "What?" "I didn't come all this way just to watch you die here," he said. "If you want to stay and give up, fine. But if you want to live, my ship's right there." He pointed toward the worn-down vessel behind him. "Your choice." Xyra stared at him. No one else had offered her a choice. No one had given her a second chance. And yet, this human, a nobody, a scavenger, was offering her both. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, to die with dignity rather than accept help from a weaker species. But deep inside, a voice whispered something else. Survive. She had been a queen, a warrior, a ruler. But none of that mattered if she died here. If she wanted her revenge, if she wanted to take back what was stolen, she had to live. Finally, she pushed herself up, wobbling slightly as she stood. Dane watched, not offering help, letting her decide on her own. She took a slow step forward, then another. Her body protested, but she ignored the pain. She walked past Dane without a word, heading toward the ship. Behind her, Dane smirked. "Good choice." The ramp closed behind them, sealing them inside. As the engines roared to life, Tyra took one last look at the moon where she had been left to die. No more. She wasn't just going to survive. She was going to take back everything. The ship shook as it left the moon's surface, breaking through the thin atmosphere. Tyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her body weak but her mind sharp. The human Dane focused on the controls, his hands moving quickly over the buttons and levers. The engines roared as the ship climbed higher, away from the place where she had been left to die. For the first time in days, she was no longer alone. But she was not safe. Zyra glanced at the ship's worn-down interior. It was nothing like the powerful warships of the Valith Empire. The metal panels were scratched, some wires were exposed, and the control screens flickered slightly. This was not a ship built for battle. "You call this a ship?" she muttered. Dane smirked but kept his eyes on the controls. "She may not be pretty, but she flies." Zyra leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. She could still feel the hunger, the exhaustion in her bones, but she forced herself to focus. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. A sharp beeping sound filled the cockpit. Dane's smirk disappeared as he looked at the radar. "That's not good," he muttered. Zyra opened her eyes. "What?" Dane tapped the screen. "Two ships, closing in fast, and they're not friendly." Zyra's body tensed. She didn't need to see the ships to know who they belonged to. The new rulers of her empire had found out she was alive, and they had sent hunters to finish the job. "They must have been watching the moon," she said bitterly, "waiting to see if anyone was foolish enough to help me." Dane flicked a switch, and the ship's engines roared louder as he pushed them to full speed. "Well, guess I'm that fool." The enemy ships appeared on the main screen. Sleek, black Valith fighters, built for speed and destruction. They moved like shadows, their wings curving like the claws of a predator. Zyra clenched her fists. She had flung ships like those before, led entire fleets into battle. And now she was running from them in a broken-down scavenger's vessel. The enemy ships fired. "Hold on," Dane shouted. The ship swerved hard to the right, dodging the first blast. The second shot skimmed the side, shaking the entire cabin. Sparks flew from the control panel, and an alarm blared loudly. "Shields down to 60%, Dane yelled. Zyra's sharp eyes scanned the controls. "Do you have weapons?" Dane hesitated. Kind of." Zyra glared at him. "What does kind of mean?" Dane flipped a switch. "It means we have one old plasma turret that overheats if you use it too much. You know how to shoot." Zyra didn't answer. Instead, she unbuckled herself and moved to the gunner's seat at the back of the cockpit. Her fingers wrapped around the controls, her instincts taking over. The enemy ships circled like vultures, preparing to strike again. Zyra exhaled slowly. Then she fired. Bright plasma bolts shot through the darkness of space. One of the enemy ships swerved to avoid the blast, but the second was not so lucky. Zyra's shot hit its wing, sending it spinning out of control before it exploded in a burst of fire and debris. Dane whistled. "Nice shot." Zyra ignored him. The second fighter was still there, and now it was angry. It fired a barrage of shots, forcing Dane to twist the ship in wild, unpredictable movements. The ship groaned under the stress. "This thing wasn't built for combat," Dane yelled. "Then fly better." Zyra snapped. She lined up another shot, but before she could fire, the enemy ship suddenly broke off its attack and turned away. Zyra frowned. "What is it doing?" Dane checked the radar. His face paled slightly. "We have a bigger problem." Zyra followed his gaze. A massive warship had just appeared on the radar, blocking their escape route. It was Valith, a capital-class destroyer, armed with enough firepower to vaporize them in seconds. A voice crackled over the radio, cold and emotionless. "Unidentified vessel, surrender the fugitive Queen Axira, and you will be spared." Zyra's heart pounded. She knew that voice. General Zorith, one of the traitors who had betrayed her. Dane looked at her. I'm guessing you don't want to surrender." Zyra's golden eyes burned with fury. "I would rather die." Dane sighed. "Yeah, figured." The warship's weapons locked onto them. There was no way to outrun it, no way to fight back. For the first time, Dane's confident smirk disappeared. "Okay," he muttered, gripping the controls. "This is going to be stupid." Zyra narrowed her eyes. "What are you?" Before she could finish, Dane slammed a button on the console. The ship jerked violently, and suddenly, everything outside the windows twisted into a blur of light and speed. They had jumped into hyperspace. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. It was a reckless move. Jumping to hyperspace without proper calculations could send them crashing into a planet, a star, or worse. She turned to Dane. "Are you insane?" Dane leaned back in his seat, letting out a relieved breath. "Probably." Zyra stared at him. He had just risked both their lives in the most reckless escape she had ever seen. And somehow, it had worked. For now, they were safe. But this was only the beginning. The ship rattled violently as it tore through hyperspace. Sparks flew from one of the control panels, and the engines made a loud, whining noise that did not sound good. Zyra gripped the edge of her seat, her sharp eyes locked on Dane. "Where did you send us?" Dane leaned forward, tapping a few buttons on the navigation screen. "I have no idea." Zyra's fingers twitched toward her broken dagger. "You don't know." Dane shrugged. "Didn't have time to set proper coordinates. I just hit the emergency jump." Zyra clenched her jaw. Hyperspace travel without a clear destination was dangerous. They could end up in a star's gravity field, an asteroid belt, or even the middle of enemy space. The ship's navigation system would eventually drop them out of hyperspace at the closest safe location, but that didn't mean it would be friendly. She exhaled sharply. "Your plan was to throw us into the unknown and hope we survive." Dane grinned. "Pretty much." Zyra glared at him, but before she could say more, the ship suddenly lurched. A loud beep filled the cockpit, and the hyperspace tunnel outside shattered into real space. The view in front of them was surprising. Instead of enemy warships or deadly asteroid fields, they floated near a massive gas giant. Its swirling orange clouds stretched across the sky, and several moons orbited it like silent watchers. Dane checked the screen. "Looks like we're near the Doran system. Middle of nowhere. No colonies, no big trade routes." He exhaled. "Good. We're safe." Zyra wasn't so sure. For now, the ship drifted near one of the smaller moons, and Dane switched off most of the systems to avoid detection. The interior lights dimmed, and silence filled the cabin. Zyra finally allowed herself to relax, just a little. She leaned back in her seat, her body still aching from hunger and exhaustion. Her golden eyes flicked toward Dane, who was watching the screens, scanning for any signs of pursuit. "You just made yourself an enemy of the Valith Empire," she said. Dane smirked. "Guess so." Zyra frowned. "You don't seem worried." Dane leaned back, resting his hands behind his head. "I don't like bullies." "And your people? They sound like the worst kind." Zyra stared at him. Most species feared the Valith. They were one of the strongest empires in the galaxy, known for their brutal rule and advanced warships. And yet, this human spoke about them like they were nothing but street thugs. She shook her head. "You are reckless." Dane chuckled. "You're not the first to say that." Silence settled between them. Zyra's mind raced. She had survived exile, escaped certain death, and now she was floating in deep space with a human who had no idea what he had gotten himself into. But the question remained, what now? She turned to Dane. "What do you want?" Dane raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Zyra narrowed her eyes. "No one risks their life for free. You saved me, but why? What do you expect in return?" Dane studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "I told you before. Seemed like the right thing to do." Zyra didn't believe him. No one helped without a reason. She had learned that lesson long ago. She leaned forward, her voice colder. If you think I will reward you with money or power, you are mistaken. I have nothing left. Dane sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I didn't save you for a reward. But if you really want to pay me back, then answer this. What's your plan? Zyra hesitated. Plan. She had spent the last few days barely surviving. She had thought only about escaping death, not about what came next. She had no army, no resources, no allies, but she had something more important. She had knowledge. Her golden eyes burned with renewed determination. I will take back my empire. Dane let out a low whistle. Ambitious. Zyra clenched her fists. The traitors who betrayed me are weak. They fear challenge. That is why they exiled me instead of killing me outright. Dane tilted his head. So, what's the first step? Zyra exhaled. Before I can fight, I must recover. And before I recover, I need information. She met his gaze. You are a scavenger. You hear things. You know how to move in the shadows. Dane smirked. You want me to be your spy. Call it what you want. Zyra said. I need to know what my enemies are planning. I need to know who is still loyal to me and who isn't. Dane thought for a moment, then nodded. All right. I know a few places where we can find information. But we need to lay low for a while. The Valeth will be hunting us. Zyra nodded. Then we disappear. For now. She looked out the window, staring at the vast, endless space. She was still weak, still wounded, but she was alive. And as long as she lived, she would fight. Dane leaned back, his usual grin returning. Well, Queen, looks like you just hired yourself a human. Zyra smirked. Try not to get yourself killed, Dane. He chuckled. No promises. The ship drifted into the shadow of the moon, disappearing from sight. For now, they were just two fugitives. But soon, the galaxy would remember who she was. Dane's ship drifted in the shadow of the barren moon, hidden from scanners. Inside the cockpit, he adjusted the controls while Zyra stood behind him, arms crossed. All right, Dane said. I know a place where we can get information. It's not pretty, but it works. Zyra narrowed her golden eyes. Where? Dane tapped the navigation screen. Ever heard of Sorgan Prime? Zyra frowned. A smuggler's world. Dane nodded. Not just smugglers. Mercenaries, bounty hunters, spies. It's a place where information is currency. If anyone knows what's happening in the Valeth Empire, it's someone on Sorgan Prime. Zyra hesitated. She didn't trust places like that. Too many liars. Too many desperate beings willing to betray others for a handful of credits. But she needed to know what her enemies were planning. Fine, she said. But be careful. If the wrong people find out I'm alive, they will sell us out. Dane grinned. That's why I have a plan. Zyra didn't like his grin. It usually meant something reckless. Dane activated the ship's engines, and they left the moon's orbit. Within moments, they jumped into hyperspace, heading straight for the lawless world of Sorgan Prime. Hours later, they entered the planet's atmosphere. Sorgan Prime was not beautiful. It was covered in thick clouds of smog, its cities built from metal scraps, rusted ships, and crumbling concrete. Lights flickered in the dark streets below, and the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the air. It was a place where rules didn't matter. Only power and credits did. Dane landed the ship in a crowded docking bay. He turned to Zyra. All right, here's the deal. You're too recognizable. Valeth royalty have a distinct look. Golden eyes, sharp features, regal posture. Zyra raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting I slouch? Dane chuckled. No, but you do need a disguise. He reached into a storage compartment and pulled out a dark, tattered cloak. Wear this. Keeps your face hidden. Zyra took the cloak and wrapped it around herself. She pulled the hood low, covering her striking features. Satisfied, Dane grinned. Almost. Try looking less like a queen and more like a desperate wanderer. Zitera shot him a sharp look. I am a queen. Dane smirked. Not today. You're not. Together, they left the ship and stepped into the chaotic streets of Sorgan Prime. The air smelled of oil, rust, and old food. Beings from all over the galaxy filled the streets. Tall, armored mercenaries, cloaked figures whispering deals, and cybernetic traders selling black market tech. Zira kept her head down as they moved through the crowd. Every step made her uneasy. The Valith Empire had many spies, and this was the kind of place they operated. Dane led her to a small, dimly lit tavern at the edge of the market district. A neon sign flickered above the entrance, reading The Broken Star. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the low hum of conversation. A few mercenaries sat in the corner, their weapons visible on their belts. A group of traders argued over prices at a back table. A bartender, a heavy-set reptilian alien with dark scales, cleaned a glass with a dirty rag. Dane walked up to the bar and leaned against it. Hey, Targus. The bartender glanced up, his yellow eyes narrowing. Dane, didn't think I'd see you again. You still owe me credits. Dane grinned. That's why I'm here. I need information. I'll make it worth your while. Targus snorted. Depends on the information. Dane lowered his voice. What's the news on the Valith Empire? Targus leaned in slightly. You heard about the power shift, right? General Zoreth and the High Council are tightening their grip. There are rumors they're searching for something or someone. His eyes flicked toward Syra, though her face remained hidden. Zyra stiffened. What do they want? Targus shrugged. No idea. But they're paying a lot of credits for information. People are scared. Dane exchanged a glance with Syra. If the Valith were still hunting for her, it meant they feared what she could do. That was useful. Anything else? Dane asked. Targus hesitated, then leaned in closer. There's one more thing. A rebellion. Zyra's breath caught. What? Targus nodded. Small groups. Scattered. Some Valith loyalists who don't like the new rulers. No real power yet, but they're looking for a leader. Zyra's fingers curled into fists beneath her cloak. A rebellion. That was her chance. Dane nodded. Thanks, Targus. He slid a few credits across the counter. For your silence. Targus grinned, taking the money. You were never here. Dane turned to Syra. We need to go. Syra nodded, her mind racing. She had thought she was alone, that her empire was lost. But now she had hope. As they stepped back into the streets, she pulled her hood lower. She was still a queen, and she was going to take back her throne. Syra and Dane moved quickly through the dark streets of Sorgan Prime. The smell of burning fuel and damp metal filled the air as distant voices argued over stolen goods. Zyra's mind raced. A rebellion. It was small, scattered, and weak, but it was real. If she could find the right people, if she could unite them, she could take back her empire. Dane glanced at her. I know that look. You're thinking about leading them. Zyra pulled her cloak tighter. I don't think. I will lead them. Dane chuckled. All right, Queen. First, we need to find them. Zyra frowned. Targus didn't say where they are. Dane smirked. He didn't have to. I know where to start looking. Zyra raised an eyebrow. You seem to know a lot about the underworld. Dane shrugged. Let's just say I've made some interesting friends over the years. They continued through the streets, weaving between crowds of aliens and criminals. The deeper they went, the darker the city became. Neon lights flickered, and distant explosions rumbled in the sky. Finally, they stopped in front of a rusted metal door, half covered in graffiti. Dane knocked 3 times, then waited. A small hatch slid open, revealing a pair of glowing blue eyes. A deep voice growled. Who are you? Dane grinned. Tell Yoren that Dane is here. The eyes narrowed. You brought company. Dane patted Sarah's shoulder. She's with me. The hatch snapped shut. A long pause followed. Then, the door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and old machinery. Dim lights flickered over a large open space, filled with scattered crates and metal tables. At the center, a group of armed figures stood, their weapons resting on their hips. A tall, broad-shouldered man with short, graying hair stepped forward. His cybernetic left arm hummed with energy. Dane, he said, I thought you were dead. Dane laughed. Not yet, Yoren. Yoren's sharp eyes flicked to Xyra. And who is this? Xyra lowered her hood. Her golden eyes burned with strength. I am Xyra, rightful queen of the Valith Empire. Silence filled the room. A few of the rebels exchanged nervous glances. Yoren folded his arms. Queen, that's a dangerous claim. Xyra stepped forward. The Empire has fallen into the hands of traitors. The rebellion is weak, scattered. But I can change that. I will unite our forces. Together, we can take back what is ours. Yoren studied her. Big words, but why should we trust you? Xyra met his gaze without fear, because I am the one they fear. A murmur spread through the room. Some of the rebels had heard the stories, how the Valith had betrayed their own queen, how they had sent assassins after her. If she was still alive, it meant she was strong. Yoren scratched his chin. All right, Queen. Prove it. There's a Valith supply station 2 sectors from here. It's lightly guarded, but valuable. We've been planning to hit it, but we don't have the numbers. Xyra understood his test. You want me to lead the attack? Yoren nodded. Show us what kind of leader you are. Xyra's lips curled into a smirk. Then let's begin. Hours later, Xyra, Dane, and a small group of rebels crouched on a rocky hillside, overlooking the Valith supply station. The outpost was small, with a handful of guards patrolling the perimeter. A few supply ships were docked, their cargo holds filled with weapons and fuel. Xyra turned to the rebels. We strike fast and hard. No wasted movements. Take down the guards quietly before they can call for help. The rebels nodded, gripping their weapons tightly. Dane leaned toward Xyra. Got a plan? Xyra smirked. Of course. She pointed to a tower on the right. Dane, take out the communication relay. No alarms. Dane nodded. On it. She looked at Yoren. You and your men handle the front gate. Keep them busy. Yoren grinned. I like this plan. Xyra turned to the others. The rest, follow me. We take the supply ships. Once we have control, we use their own weapons against them. The rebels exchanged glances, impressed by her confidence. Dane smirked. All right, Queen. Let's see what you can do. The attack happened fast. Dane slipped through the shadows and reached the relay tower. With a few quick movements, he disabled the communication system, cutting off the station's ability to call for reinforcements. At the same time, Yoren and his men charged the front gate. Blaster fire filled the air as the guards scrambled to fight back. Xyra and her team moved in from the side, slipping past the chaos. She took down a guard with a swift strike, then motioned for her rebels to move forward. Within minutes, they reached the supply ships. Xyra climbed into the cockpit of one, her fingers dancing over the controls. The engines roared to life. Outside, the remaining Valith guards turned in shock, just in time to see their own ship's cannons aiming at them. Xyra's voice crackled over the speakers. Stand down or be destroyed. The remaining guards dropped their weapons. The rebels cheered. The station was theirs. Dane whistled. Not bad, Queen. Xyra smirked. This is just the beginning. She turned to the rebels, her golden eyes burning with purpose. The Empire belongs to us, and we will take it back. The rebels roared in agreement. The revolution had begun. The stolen Valeth supply ship soared through space, its engines humming softly. Zyra stood at the control panel, her golden eyes scanning the navigation screen. Behind her, the rebels secured the stolen weapons and supplies, their spirits high after their first victory. Yoren leaned against a crate, arms crossed. That was a good hit. We got weapons, fuel, and a working ship. But the Valeth will notice. They'll come looking for us. Zyra nodded. Let them come. We will be ready. Dane, sitting in the pilot's chair, smirked. That's the kind of confidence I like. But we still need a plan. We can't keep running forever. Zyra turned to him. We are not running. We are fighting. Dane raised an eyebrow. I figured. So, what's next? Zyra took a deep breath. We need to find the rest of the rebellion. Targus said they were scattered. We must bring them together. Only then can we strike at the heart of the Empire. Yoren nodded. I know of a rebel cell hiding in the Sithrax belt. They might join us if we can reach them. Dane frowned. The Sithrax belt. That place is crawling with asteroid storms and pirate ambushes. Zyra met his gaze. Do you have a better idea? Dane sighed. Nope. Just reminding everyone that we might die. Zyra smirked. Then we move now, before the Valeth find us. Dane shook his head, but a grin tugged at his lips. All right, Queen. Let's go. The ship slipped into hyperspace, heading toward the Sithrax belt. Inside the cargo hold, the rebels checked their weapons, preparing for what lay ahead. Some whispered about Zyra, about how she had survived betrayal, and now led them toward something greater. Yoren approached her. They believe in you, he said. Zyra glanced at the rebels. They believe in hope. I must not fail them. Yoren nodded. Then don't. Before she could respond, an alarm blared. Dane's voice crackled over the speakers. Guys, we have a problem. Zyra rushed to the cockpit. What is it? Dane pointed at the radar. Valeth warships. They found us. Zyra's jaw tightened. How? Dane checked the console. They must have tracked the stolen ship's signal. That was my mistake. I should have disabled it. Yoren cursed. How many ships? Dane swallowed. 3. And they're closing fast. Zyra didn't hesitate. Then we fight. Dane blinked. You do realize they have bigger guns, right? Zyra's eyes burned with determination. We have speed. And we have courage. Dane exhaled. All right, Queen. Let's do this. The battle began. The first Valeth warship opened fire, red energy beams slicing through space. Dane jerked the controls, dodging just in time. The stolen supply ship wasn't built for combat, but Dane pushed it to its limits. Yoren. Zyra shouted, Take the weapons control. Yoren ran to the turret system and powered it up. On it, a second Valeth ship moved into position, preparing to fire. Zyra clenched her fists. Not today. She activated the stolen ship's rear cannons and fired. The blast hit the Valeth warship's shields, shaking it violently. Yoren followed up with another shot, damaging its engines. Dane grinned. Nice shooting. But the third enemy ship wasn't idle. It launched boarding pods, small crafts designed to pierce hulls and send soldiers inside. Zyra's heart pounded. They're trying to board us. Dane cursed. We can't let that happen. Yoren's voice came through the comms. Too late. They've latched onto the hull. Zyra grabbed her weapon. Then we fight them face to face. Inside the cargo hold, the rebels took defensive positions as the metal doors shook. Sparks flew as the Valeth soldiers cut their way in. Zyra stood at the front, blaster in hand. Hold the line. With a loud clang, the doors burst open. Valeth soldiers in dark armor stormed in, weapons raised. The rebels opened fire. Zyra moved like lightning. She dodged a blast, fired back, and took down 2 soldiers in seconds. Yoren fought beside her, his cybernetic arm deflecting enemy strikes. The rebels, outnumbered but determined, pushed back. Dane arrived, blaster in hand. "Having fun without me?" Zyra smirked. "About time you joined." Dane fired at a soldier. Wouldn't miss it. The battle raged on, but the rebels fought fiercely. Slowly, the Valith soldiers began to fall back. Then, boom! The entire ship shook. Dane grabbed the radio. "What was that?" A rebel shouted. "The Valith damaged the hyperdrive. We're losing power." Zyra's heart pounded. If the ship was disabled, they were finished. Dane checked the controls. Engines failing. "We're going down." Zyra's mind raced. They were still near the Sithrax belt. If they could steer toward an asteroid, they might have a chance to crash land and escape. She grabbed the controls. "Hold on." The ship spun, heading toward a massive asteroid. Dane's eyes widened. "You're crazy." Zyra's hands stayed firm. "Trust me." The ship hit the asteroid's surface, skidding across the rocky terrain before finally coming to a stop. Silence followed. Then, Yoren groaned. "We're alive." Dane sat up. "Barely." Zyra exhaled. "But the war isn't over yet." She stood up, brushing dust off her cloak. Outside, Valith ships circled, searching for survivors. Zyra's eyes burned with fire. They were not defeated. Not yet. The rebellion would rise again. The crashed ship lay in ruins, smoke rising from its damaged engines. Sparks flickered along the broken hull as Tyra, Dane, and the rebels crawled out, coughing from the dust. The asteroid's surface was rough, covered in jagged rocks and deep cracks. Above them, the Valith warships circled like hungry predators. Dane wiped sweat from his forehead. "Well, that could have gone worse." Yoren groaned. "We barely survived, and we're stranded on a rock. How exactly could this be worse?" Dane pointed up. "They could start shooting again." Zyra stepped forward, scanning the enemy ships. "They won't. Not yet. They want to capture us alive." Yoren spat on the ground. "Of course they do. Traitors like General Kaler don't just want us dead. They want to make an example out of us." Zyra's eyes burned with determination. "Then we won't let them." The rebels gathered around, their faces covered in dirt and sweat. Some looked hopeful, others afraid. They had fought bravely, but now they were cornered. Dane knelt beside a broken panel, inspecting the ship's damage. "Engines are fried. Communications are down. We can't call for help." A rebel named Rayan stepped forward. "Then what do we do? We can't fight them from here." Zyra turned to the group. "We find another way. This asteroid is big enough to hide in. We disappear before they land." Yoren frowned. "Disappear? How?" Zyra pointed toward a large canyon in the distance. "That way. The asteroid's surface is rough. But if we go deep enough, they won't be able to track us." Dane sighed. "Great, so now we're running again." Zyra's voice was firm. "No, we're surviving. If we die here, the rebellion dies with us. We need to regroup, then we fight back." Dane held up his hands. "All right, Queen. Lead the way." The rebels moved quickly, climbing over rocky terrain, pushing forward as fast as they could. The asteroid's thin atmosphere made it harder to breathe, but they didn't stop. Above them, the Valith ships hovered, scanning the surface. Bright searchlights swept across the ground, forcing them to hide behind rocks. Dane whispered, "They're looking for heat signatures." Zyra nodded. "Then we stay low and keep moving." Minutes passed like hours as they crawled toward the canyon. The closer they got, the stronger the wind became, kicking up clouds of dust. Finally, they'd reached the canyon's edge. Below them, a dark maze of tunnels stretched deep into the asteroid. Yoren frowned. "We go in there." Zyra nodded. "It's our best chance." One by one, they climbed down, their boots scraping against the rough stone. Inside, the tunnels were cold and silent. The air smelled of metal and dust, and strange glowing crystals lined the walls. Dane tapped one of the crystals. "What is this?" Zara examined it. "Ancient energy deposits. This asteroid used to be mined long ago. The Valith abandoned it when the resources ran low." Yorin scoffed. "Good. That means no one will expect us to be here." Dane smirked. "Unless they know about these tunnels." Zara shot him a look. "Then we make sure they don't find us." For hours, they moved through the winding tunnels, searching for a safe place to rest. Finally, they found a large cavern deep within the asteroid. The glowing crystals provided dim light, and the air was slightly warmer. The rebels collapsed onto the ground, exhausted. Ryan sighed. "So, now what?" Zyra stood in the center, looking at each of them. "We plan, we recover, and we fight back." Dane leaned against a rock. "I like the sound of that. But we need a ship and weapons. We lost everything in the crash." Yorin crossed his arms. "There's only one way we're getting off this rock. Stealing a Valith ship." The rebels murmured. It was a bold idea. Zyra's eyes gleamed. "Then that's what we'll do." The next morning, the rebels scouted the tunnels, looking for a way out. Dane and Sarah climbed to a high ledge, peering outside. The Valith had landed a troop transport near the wreckage of their ship. Soldiers searched the area, scanning for survivors. Dane whispered, "That transport, it's lightly guarded." Zyra's heart pounded. "That's our way out." She turned to the rebels. "We move at night. We take the transport. We escape." Yorin grinned. "Now that's a plan I can get behind." Dane chuckled. "Let's hope it works." Zyra's voice was calm but firm. "It will work, because we have something they don't." Yorin raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Zyra's golden eyes burned with fire. "A reason to win." The rebels nodded. Their fear was gone, replaced by something stronger: determination. That night, the real fight would begin. The Queen's rebellion was far from over. The cold night settled over the asteroid, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. The Valith soldiers patrolled near the crashed ship, unaware that in the darkness of the canyon, Zyra and her rebels prepared for battle. Dane checked his weapon. "All right, Queen. One last crazy plan before we die." Zyra smirked. "Not die. Win." Yorin crouched beside them. "We only get one shot at this. If they call reinforcements, we're finished." Zyra nodded. "Then we do this fast. Take the transport before they know what's happening." Dane grinned. "Let's make it loud, then." The rebels moved like shadows, creeping closer to the enemy transport. The Valith guards stood near the entrance, rifles in hand, their eyes scanning the area. They had no idea that death was coming for them. Zyra raised her hand, the signal to attack. In an instant, the rebels struck. Blaster fire lit up the night as the first guards fell, their weapons clattering to the ground. The rest of the soldiers shouted in alarm, scrambling for cover. Dane sprinted forward, dodging shots, and fired twice. One enemy dropped, then another. Yorin charged into the fight, his cybernetic arm smashing a soldier aside. "We have to move." Zyra led the way, her golden eyes burning with determination. She blasted the last guard standing at the transport's door. Inside. Now. The rebels stormed into the ship, securing the cockpit. Dane jumped into the pilot's seat. Time to fly. The engines roared to life as the Valith forces realized the danger. Soldiers outside opened fire, but the ship's shields deflected the blasts. Yorin shouted, "They're calling for backup." Zyra's fists clenched. "Then we leave now." Dane pulled the controls, and the transport lifted off. As the ship shot into the sky, alarms blared. The Valith warships above turned to intercept. Dane cursed. "They're on us." Zyra took the co-pilot seat. "Then we fight back." Yorin manned the gunner controls. "Let's see how they like our firepower." The transport twisted through space, dodging enemy fire. Yoren fired back, hitting one of the enemy ships. Sparks exploded as it spiraled away. Dane grinned. Nice shot. But the biggest warship was still chasing them. Zyra's mind raced. We need to disable them, or they'll follow us forever. Dane smirked. I have an idea, but you're not gonna like it. Zyra raised an eyebrow. Do it. Dane pulled the ship into a steep dive, heading straight for a floating asteroid. Yoren's eyes widened. You're insane. Dane grinned. Yep. At the last second, he jerked the controls, skimming past the asteroid's surface. The Valith warship followed, but it was too slow. Boom! The massive rock collided with the warship, sending it spinning into space. The rebels cheered. Dane whooped. And that's how humans do it. Zyra smiled. You are full of surprises, Dane. Dane winked. That's why you keep me around. With the enemy disabled, the rebels escaped into hyperspace. As the stars stretched around them, the ship fell silent. Ryan sighed. We actually made it. Yoren nodded. For now, but the Valith will come for us again. Zyra stood in the center of the cockpit, her gaze strong. Let them come. Dane leaned back. So, what's next? Zyra's voice was clear. We find the rest of the rebellion. We unite them. And then, she clenched her fists. We take back my throne. The rebels erupted in cheers. The queen had returned, and the Valith Empire would fall. The end.